I'm so excited to be here. This is like now my launch event because last night's big event got canceled. So yay, Richmond! I never been here before. Oh no, not on. Here we go. No. Yes. At first a blizzard tries to fell me, and now a microphone. I shall not be brought down.
All right. So why don't we start off with where you got the idea for I Was Here?
So I call I Was Here my affair book because I was cheating on the books I was married to. People like when they hear this they go like I'm about to like divulge, like it's like no, I'm speaking metaphorically. So I was working on Just One Day and Just One Year, and they were challenging books for me because they were the first books that I had written that were I don't know how people write series books, Maggie, where you have all this stuff that is so plotted and woven, and I was having a hard time with it. It was starting to feel a lot like an old, tired marriage. And then this idea came to me, and I'll explain where it came from in a bit. But I had these 2 books to write under deadline, but I kept kind of sneaking away to like work on it for like an hour, and it was like driving off to this sleazy motel to work on my book, and it would just be like so exciting, and then I would go back and I would be like newly energized with Just One Day and Just One Year. When I finished it, I looked at it and the affair book, it was like one of those rare things like, oh wow, I actually really like this. So the actual sort of more concrete story of where it came from, which is years before I was a journalist, and one of the last big pieces I did as a journalist was it was an oral history of suicide in young women. And so I was talking to family and friends of young women who had taken their own lives and getting all these different sort of perspectives of like what had happened in the lead up. And there was this one young woman named Susie Gonzalez, and talking to her friends and family was a very kind of like jarring, cognitive dissonant experience, because at that point I did all kinds of journalism, so I would profile people, and I kept having the sense that Susie was somebody I would be profiling because she had like directed a movie at 19, or had a book that was coming out, or she was a singer in a band. Like she was somebody who had very precociously made it. She was so clearly bright and charismatic, and she had such a spark about her that it was coming through all these interviews, and I kept having to kind of remind myself, oh no, that's not why you're talking to people about her. You're talking to people about her because she had taken her own life. And there were other circumstances about her story that people were so surprised by it, even though it kind of became clear that she had suffered a pretty crippling depression, and she'd been involved with the suicide support group that encouraged her toward taking her own life. And so Susie, like some people that you report on, she really got stuck in my head. And one little piece of it is sort of tragic, poignant piece, is that she sent her suicide note on a time delay, so that she would be gone by the time people received it. And somehow I started thinking about that years later, and not even about Susie or Meg, who's the character that she inspired in I Was Here, but about what it would be like to get an email like that, seemingly out of the blue, from somebody you loved very much. And that's where Cody came from. And Cody is the main character of I Was Here, and she's Susie's, Meg's like lifelong best friend. And the book opens with Cody receiving that out of the blue suicide note.
So this is a very emotional book to read. Did you ever have moments when it was hard for you to write about it because of the emotional content?
Yes, but the hardest part to write, which is actually a part that when I was having the affair and sort of sneaking off, I kind of skipped over because it was so difficult to write. I don't think it was because it was like emotional in that it made me cry. But it was the parts where, without giving too much away, Cody starts to dig into the circumstances of Meg's death, and she starts an online relationship with this person. I had to kind of skip over that entire relationship and kind of leave that like, I will write this later, because I knew that wherever I was at that moment in my life, I was not in a place to be able to write that particular relationship. That was the really, really hard part to write.
And you mentioned the suicide support groups. Did you do any research, sort of like Cody does in the book?
I did look at some of those message boards. I think the real life Susie's parents have tried to get, and a lot of them sort of, to get them shut down. It's sort of a nebulous space there with free speech issues. So they're not as many as there were, I think, in Susie's day, but I definitely did find some of them. I didn't need to spend that much time on them to be sad and horrified, and to be able to build in my mind what had happened. And then I also kind of knew from Susie's story the kind of things and messaging that she had got. So I did spend not that much time, because that was sort of like a rabbit hole that I didn't want to go too far down. But even the fictional one that I created, like I said, that was sort of the stuff I had to come back to in bits, because it was almost like too intense to deal with all at once. So I would go into a section of it and come back, and then in another revision kind of go deeper and come back, because it was just, again, too kind of hard to go there all at once.
One last question.
So I think the ending in I Was Here definitely gives closure to the readers, but would you ever sort of consider like expanding the world of Cody and Meg and Ben?
I'll never say never, but I have written 2 duets. So If I Stay and Where She Went, and Just One Day and Just One Year. And with If I Stay and Where She Went, I never intended to write a second book. I had finished If I Stay, and I was writing an entirely different book that will never get published. I wrote a whole book. It was scheduled, it had a title. It was called How Macy Grew a Soul. But all the time that I was working on that story, the characters were waking me up in the middle of the night, and they were like, "Where have you left us?" And I would be like, "What do you mean? Like, I gave you guys a hopeful ending." They're like, "Where have you left us?" And then I thought about it, and they had such grueling couple of years ahead of them. I didn't want to think about where I left them, so I kind of skipped ahead. And that's where I started to think about it, and that's where the story started to kind of come together, and it was Adam's story this time, and that's where She Went came into being. With Just One Day and Just One Year, they were conceived of as doing as a duet. So the challenge of those 2 books was that you would read one book and have a certain perspective, and then another writer has sort of compared them to like those transparencies that you had as a kid, where you put the second picture on top and the picture changes. So I really wanted to do those. So I Was Here has neither of those. Like I have no desire to kind of like tell any other story, and it's been more than a year since I finished that book, and the characters are quiet in my head, so I don't think that I will carry on.